I gather you're reading comments I can't see.
Yes, I am. I'm reading comments. I think it's time to start. So let's do it.
All right.
Okay, this is Joe Firestone for Real Progressives on Tuesday night at 8 p.m. And Bill Cimbrelo and I are back for you. And tonight is going to be mostly devoted to your cues and Bill's answers, with, of course, occasional comments from me because I can't keep my mouth shut. And so anyway, can we start with you, Bill, if you want to say some things that we didn't get a chance to say last week?
Sure.
That'd be great.
Great. Well, first of all, Joe, thank you again for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity once again. And
my pleasure, Bill.
And the format, I think, is a great opportunity. So just to recap, I am a candidate for the 9th Congressional District in Massachusetts. I am running a very bold progressive platform here that includes a Green New Deal. It includes a $15 minimum wage, Medicare for all, a free in-state college tuition, and those are kind of the highlights of the program. And I'm running here against the status quo. Bill Keating is the incumbent, and I feel that much like the rest of the establishment Democratic Party, they've gotten way too cozy with corporate interests, and they've drifted far too close to the middle, and I believe that's largely responsible why we ended up with President Donald Trump. So that's why I'm here. I'm running to try and move the Democratic Party away from the middle and to the left to the extent that we can, and other candidates like me can get elected, get into office, and make something happen. And that's the goal, and that's the intent, and we're well on the way to doing that. And thank you.
Okay, so let's get some comments in here, folks, or questions. Okay, apart from the greetings, they're glad you've come back, Bill.
Well, thank you. Me too.
And we have Stephen Hale, one of our Australian colleagues here today, or tonight, and he's telling us good morning, and we're telling him good evening, which is actually the opposite of what it should be. But anyway,
I see Johnny there in the mix.
Yeah, Johnny is there in the mix, and he's warning us that everybody is watching us, so we better be on our game tonight. And he asks, what part of the Green New Deal do you find most important to work on first?
Well, great question. Appreciate it, Johnny. As many people know, I am a great supporter of the Off Fossil Fuel for a Better Future Act that was written by Tulsi Gabbard, rep from Hawaii, HR 3671. I have pledged to support that given the opportunity and co-sponsor it. And that takes us off the dependency of fossil fuels by the year 2035 with really a progressive process to get there. Locally here, interestingly enough, I actually spoke to one of the local wind turbine corporations here, interest, earlier today. I don't want to name them, but there's a lot going on here locally in Massachusetts, off of Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, I should say, where we're going to have anywhere between 80 to 100 wind turbines that are going to be feeding us a significant amount of megawatts. And I'm very, very anxious to see that happen and get expanded all along our oceans, our coastal ways, but also taking into consideration the environmental impact that that may have, and working with the fisheries and the commercial fishermen to make sure we don't have conflicts there.
Okay, but Stephen Hale asks, though, more broadly, how would you describe a Green New Deal? And so that's a broader question. I think he's asking more for the whole New Deal part of it as well as the whole green part of it.
I think at the end of the day, if you look at where we are as a country now, where we are subsidizing basically the fossil fuel industry with corporate welfare, I think that we need to stop doing that. They've been raking in ridiculous profits for decades. They certainly don't need these subsidies, and we all know why they're getting them. But if we took those interests and moved them to facilitate and incentivize moving the country in a green direction, that would be certainly part of what I would consider a Green New Deal, and making green energy jobs. You and I chatted the other day about the possibility of where we now have gas stations, instead of having gas stations, why couldn't we have lithium battery exchange stations? So basically, if we can make all the lithium batteries in the electric cars to be one or two standards, you would pull into a charging station, if you will, swap out your battery, swap in a new one, and you're good for another 250, 300 miles, whatever the range happens to be. So there's ways that we can create jobs, opportunities, and basically anything that's going to move us away from this large carbon footprint, I consider part of the Green New Deal, and creating these jobs, moving away from fossil fuels and anything that's associated with that.
Okay. What would be the role of the government in creating the green jobs?
Great question. So part of the reason we're here is to talk about certainly MMT, and MMT, modern monetary theory, would obviously play a very key role in that process if we let it. And that's really the key here. If you look at, we've got the deficit hawks and the deficit doves, but in both cases, they're talking about deficits instead of and breaking budgets and all the rest of that, instead of acknowledging the fact that we do have fiat currency and the federal government can never run out of money and can never go broke. So where does that money come from? It comes from investments by the federal government to make that happen. And That's basically it in a nutshell.
Okay, could you say something for us about the federal job guarantee as a possibility in creating the green jobs? And also, what are the ideas you have about the kinds of green jobs that might be created under such a program?
Sure. So the types of green jobs, I'll take sort of the last one first, is similar to what we were talking about earlier. This particular wind turbine production that's being anticipated here locally, in and of itself, that's going to produce about 1,500 jobs. And these jobs will range from blue collar and white collar jobs, high tech and some low tech, admittedly. But if we start to blow that out all over the country, and we have a tremendous opportunity to create all these kinds of jobs and these positive changes. One of the things that you and I talked about before the first talk, when we were in the lobby, as you call it, I think we talked about a concept that J.D. Alt talks about, which is sequestration and a sequestration bond as a way to keep fossil fuels in the ground. And it's an interesting concept because basically what it does is it compensates people that have a vested interest in the fossil fuel industry by giving them the option to purchase these sequestration bonds, which give them a calculated yield, in Alt's example, that would mature in 15 years. That would equate to, in large part, to what the yield would be if they stayed investing in fossil fuels. And so the objective is, if you've got these sequestration bonds, you therefore keep the oil in the ground because you've got the benefit of having those bonds that relate to the fossil fuel industry, but you're not physically pumping the oil out, creating the climate issues and, of course, the potential for pollution that it does create. Was that both parts of the question or?
I think that was just the first part of the question, actually.
So what was the first part again? I'm sorry.
Okay, the first part of the question was, well, I'm not sure whether this was the first part or the second part, but the part of the question I'd like you to talk a little bit more about is the kinds of new green jobs that we would be able to create under the Job Guarantee Program.
I think that was actually the second part. What was the first one? Because I talked about that, basically the wind turbine, guys going out and installing them. Do you have that up or no?
Right, but that's only one kind of job.
Oh, sure. Okay. So I mean, again, one of the things that's going on in France right now, they're actually putting solar panels on highways. Okay, and these are things that we can do. It's a concept that I've been talking about. And when I'm talking about on the highways, I'm talking about the highway. I'm not talking about solar panels on the side of the road the way we see all over the place now. And that has, to my mind, huge implications, particularly here in New England, because if we can do that and have storage cells also on the sides of the roads, we can have roads never getting iced up, roads never needing plowing, and access to water that has not been degraded with salt, for example, when they have to salt the highways to keep it from freezing. So there's the opportunities for technology, solar cells themselves, wind turbines, geothermal. There's basically just starting to scratch the surface using tidal energy, right, from the ocean. Differences in tide to do all that. We've got hydro. Lots and lots and lots of opportunities to keep oil in the ground and still get all the energy that we need from these technologies that are, many of them are in their infancy here in the United States, but have been rolled out for quite some time in Europe, for example.
Okay. So Johnny Axum asks, what about local waterway cleanup? I just talked to a local Sierra Club about implications to staff the local rivers with by cleanup crews instead of leaving it to volunteers.
So are you talking about, Johnny, are you talking about the waterway itself, or the grounds that are on either side of these waterways, or are you talking about the water? Are you talking about the often the cans of trash or bags that we see laying around these, or both?
Well, why don't we assume he's talking both? Okay, until he quickly writes a comment.
Okay, all right. Well, I mean, certainly, cleaning up debris surrounding a waterway is an opportunity to create some of these guaranteed jobs that we've been alluding to here and there. As far as cleaning up waterways themselves, it can be done. We need equipment, but we also need equipment that is going to be able to remove toxins without jeopardizing the ecology that's already in there. Because as you suck these waters into whatever equipment you're treating, you don't want to be killing marine life, or aquatic life, I should say, in that case.
Okay, Johnny adds, any cleanup, he says, clean up our communities through a federal job guarantee.
Sure. I mean, it's a great way to use that. Again, to sort of bring it to a more local situation here. We have here on Cape Cod about 70%, I think, is the number of homes that are running on septic systems rather than being piped into the sewer. Sorry about the dirty conversation, but at the end of the day, what happens is we have a high buildup of nitrates that ends up in the waterways here, and can cause a real problem with this nitrogen buildup that also goes out into the bays here, and we end up getting a high algae count, and there's all kinds of issues related to that. So that would be an ideal situation too here locally for these federal job guarantee jobs, to be able to address that both from an equipment standpoint. And there are ways. I've attended some meetings. There's different kinds of wells that can be used to capture the runoff and keep these things under control and reduce the problem. And even to the extent that we talk about the septic systems here, even to the extent of installing full systems here that are able to be treated by the local POTW. So that's important.
Okay, so I put a further comment of Johnny's up on the screen. You could probably see it there.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, Johnny.
Okay, so I'm going to hide that now. Also, Leigh Baltzer has a question. She asks, how do you feel about ranked choice voting?
I'm a proponent of ranked choice voting. I think that I'm going to catch hell over this, but the two-party system has demonstrated time and time again that it's walking in lockstep with corporate interest. And yes, I'm running as a Democrat, but I also feel that we need to open up the electoral process to other parties, other interests that represent the people, and that's key. I'm running a grassroots campaign to represent the people, and I believe that if there are other candidates that want to run a grassroots campaign or sticking to the fact that they're going to represent the people, then they ought to do it. We saw Tim Canova in the last 3 days. I believe I think it was 3 days ago, he declared that he's going to run as an independent against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and my hat's off to him. He's got a unique situation there, and I support him, and I think that progressives around the country need to support that as well.
Yeah, so do I. and I was really happy to see that he made the move. Okay, I was sorry that he had to make it, but it was clear that they were just going to cheat him again.
Yeah.
I mean, it was absolutely clear. So it was going to be a futile run unless he withdrew and campaigned as an independent, which is what's happening. Okay, and I think that was a very popular move around here. Also, I don't think you'll catch hell over RCV here.
No.
We have a lot of RCV fans here. I've noticed.
I don't mean here. I don't mean here.
So.
Yeah.
But in other areas, you think you'll get a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think in Tim's situation, it's just how's the saying go? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Right? And I think that's the classic situation that he absolutely made the right decision there.
I'm sorry the whole country hasn't come to feel that way also. Okay, well, Carol sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, that's all right.
Okay, so Carol Kutinhook says lawn chemicals are a big problem in both branches of the Westport River.
Yep.
Is that in your district?
Westport is, yep. Yep, Westport is. Whatever. No, Westford is, not West. No, Westford, not Westport. So no.
So I suppose she's implicitly asking whether you would support a bill or as part of a federal job guarantee bill, whether you would call out the problem of cleaning up our rivers across the nation.
Okay, so
I suppose that's a way to translate that into a broader question.
Yeah, all right. So I'm going to back up here because I wanted to check. So Westport, I'm pulling up here. This is my nomination sheets for the towns. Westport is in my district. There's a lot of towns. We have one of the largest districts geographically of the entire state of Massachusetts geographically. So I take it back. Westport is in my district. Again, it's a perfect opportunity to use MMT funding and potentially the federal jobs guarantee to do that. Lawn chemicals are going to be tending to be organic in nature, and a lot of that can be taken out using activated carbon. But then the question becomes, what do you do with the activated carbon once it's saturated? So, you've got to have solutions that, we can't just keep kicking the can down the road. You fix one thing and you create another problem somewhere else, almost like the nuclear industry, right? We thought we had the great solution to not use fossil fuels and use radiation instead. But what do we do with the fuel rods? So it can be addressed. I'm sure there's ways of doing that. It needs to be explored, and certainly I would be interested in finding solutions that work.
Okay, so Mark Fabian asks, how would you address the selling off of resources like fresh water?
Wow, I'm totally against that. The whole Nestle's thing is pretty upsetting to me, frankly. I think that again, we continuously in this government, we are putting profits before the people, and I'm totally against that completely. Here we have Flint, Michigan still doesn't have clean water, and here we're giving Nestle's all the water they need. I mean, there's something wrong there. Clearly, the Flint water crisis, if we had the mindset which we need to have, which is MMT is working for the people, Flint, Michigan would have not gone. How long has it gone now? Are we on 2 years now since this happened? It's embarrassing.
I think we're on 3 since this has happened.
It's an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment. It's obviously a health risk, and I absolutely again a perfect use of MMT funding to go in there. I thought at one point they were talking about the Army Corps of Engineers going in there and doing something. I'm not really familiar where this is at, but it's a total embarrassment.
Okay, one small correction. It isn't really MMT funding. Okay, MMT is an approach to economics that has a description of how the system actually works in it. According to that particular description, the reserves that we generate as a nation are generated through the appropriations of Congress and through the creation of the reserves by the Federal Reserve Bank. Okay, and the details of how we get to those 2 contributions are details. Okay, in other words, it's not that some of those things are MMT correct. Okay, and other ways of doing so are not MMT correct. Right. But it may be that MMT ideas would suggest some other procedures for getting money into the Treasury spending account that are more advantageous from a political point of view than what we do now.
Right.
Because essentially what we do now is we have a situation where we're first withdrawing funds from the economy, the non-government sector, through taxing and through selling bonds. And the act of selling bonds then creates a political situation where people say, oh, we have all this debt, and this debt is impossible for us to repay, and it's a burden on our grandchildren, and we cannot tolerate that. We have to pay down the debt. We have to make our deficits smaller so that our debt to GDP ratio is improved over a period of time. And we get into that kind of problem and that kind of debate, and that bogs down progressive fiscal policy. It slows it down or entirely stops it, and is probably a big reason for the equality which has come to the United States over the last years or so. Instead of saying MMT funding or things like that, what we try to say is using MMT ideas
right.
Concerning how we spend and what our capacity to spend is, and what our fiscal space is. Okay, in other words, what our fiscal policy space is. And while I'm at it, I ought to emphasize, once again, as I usually do, that even though from a solvency point of view, we can spend as much as we want, from the point of view of impact on the economy, we cannot spend as much as we want. If we spend too much, or if we spend on the wrong things, we're going to have effects that are very negative on the economy. And one of the things we have to avoid is so much of deficit spending, however we choose to pay for it in terms of details of the procedures. We have to avoid such a great amount of deficit spending that it causes inflation. Okay, so I don't think that I had to explain that whole thing to you, but I'm explaining it to everybody, of course, because I want to make sure everybody knows we recognize that, and that MMT recognizes that inflation can be a very serious problem. In fact, one of the main goals of MMT is to have, well, two of the main goals that are most important are full employment and price stability. When people describe MMT, they normally forget about that very important second goal and fail to recognize that that is a goal of MMT. So I didn't want to emphasize that.
Yeah, and if I can sort of jump on the tail end of that, if
Sure.
by utilizing the concept of MMT and creating the federal jobs guarantee, we then are able to release millions and millions of dollars in sales tax to the communities, payroll taxes, right? So all these things, that's the real trickle down potential of all this, where right now all our local and state governments are really starved for the revenues. We see teachers going on strike for low wages. They're having to pay for school supplies. That all can go away if we have, as you say, a fully employed workforce that is always at the ready if they want to go back into the private sector, but they're already generating, again, this tax base that helps to fund infrastructure if need be locally, and again, if it isn't federally funded. So am I correct in all that?
Yes, I think you are. Okay, so what Jeff Ginter says is, what good is government if it privatizes water to private untouchable entities can poison it? I think that's a very hard-hitting and relevant question.
Well, again, it gets back to the fact that we have, unfortunately, and they've shown it time and time again, and the reason we are where we are is because our Congress, our government, has demonstrated that they are not beholding to the people. They are currently beholding to corporate interests, special interests. If they were working, let's look at it this way. Let's back up. Suppose that we said, if we had a government that worked for us, would we even be having this conversation? We would not. We would already have Medicare for all. We would already have the full employment that we're talking about. We would already have our infrastructure to be state of the art, and we could have smart highways and all the rest of that. We wouldn't be facing a potential world where someday we all have to wear gas masks because we can't breathe the air we're breathing. So we have the proof. The proof is what we're living in right now and where we're heading. Our government is not working for us. And the reason I'm running is exactly that. That's why I'm running a grassroots campaign. That's why I'm not taking corporate money. And the other candidates that I support are in the same on the same platform. We're coming at this the same way. You cannot expect a candidate that is going to take corporate funding now to then take corporate funding now, and then when they get into Congress, all of a sudden say, "Oh no, I'm not going to take it now." That's nonsense. That's nonsense, because the corporate lobbyists, the special interests, are funding their ticket in there. The only ones funding our campaign are private, small donors, and we are living day to day from that. I won't kid you. It's a tough fight, because all of us progressives are in effect fighting for the same dollars at this point, because we're not waiting for Raytheon or Lockheed Martin to write us the big check. It's not going to happen. And if it did, I'd send it back.
Okay, so Johnny has an encouraging comment. He says, now he's digging in. Atta boy.
Thanks, Johnny.
Okay, so with that encouraging comment, we move on to Jeff Ginter, who says, fund all education at the federal level, save the states the burden. And then he says, we have to remember there are currency issuers and currency users. And of course, he means the states are currency users. And so their capability is very limited compared to the federal government.
Right, and they also, unlike the concept of MMT, they do have to look at their balance sheets quite differently, right? Where the states have a budget that they have to work within, and certainly that's a valid concept that needs exploring. I guess the things that would concern me are, do we really want the federal government to be at that level where they're standardizing the curriculum, for example? And I look at who's in power now, and my answer is straight up no. Okay.
Well, yeah, but Jeff didn't really suggest that. He just said that the education be funded at the federal level.
Right, but you and I both know that all they have to do is they could say, okay, we're going to fund it, but you're only going to teach this and this and this, and you're not going to teach evolution or whatever. You know what I'm saying? And that concerns me.
I know what you're saying, and I know also that one thing that Americans across the country really treasure is their voices in the local school system. And sometimes that has really terrible effects, but sometimes, but there are very good effects. Right. And by and large, I think the consensus is that even if there are some federal standards that are imposed, that for the most part, the local control of schools is a good thing.
If I may.
Okay, but if I can finish this though, just as the federal job guarantee is to be structured as a nationally funded program that would be run at the local level, I think what Jeff Ginter, since I know him fairly well, is suggesting here that the funding come from the federal level, okay, but the educational programs would still be run by the local communities, right. With, of course, some exceptions in terms of national standards, and of course, just how many exceptions and what kinds of exceptions ought to be applied is always a subject for national decision making and very intense political debate.
Right. And so, one of the things that I'm talking about in my platform is free in-state college tuition. In fact, my platform really is free pre-K through 16, if you want to think about it that way. So from that standpoint, yes, employing the MMT model for funding, all of that would be a good way to go. One of the things that, of course, and if you look at the current regime, we're looking at Betsy DeVos and what she's trying to do there, promoting satellite schools and all of that, and again, we've got to extricate these people from these positions and really move our government to work for us. So I don't have a problem with the concept at all.
So you got a direct question from Mark Fabian, who asks, so Bill, as a legislator, would you sponsor a bill that would allow fresh water to be privatized?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. That would not allow fresh water to be privatized. Oh. Sorry, Mark. I misspoke.
Oh, okay. So yes, I would. So water is a natural resource that belongs to everyone. I would absolutely not allow water to be privatized. One of the things that I think, if you look at Koch Industries, Koch brothers are kind of they kind of have a full circle responsibility there. They're both causing the pollution, and then they've got one of their subsidiaries is designed to clean up water. Okay, so you see what's going on there. So we really need to get control and get a grip on our water, and make sure that fracking needs to stop. Right, and that gets back to keeping it in the ground. I know people are saying, well, it's great. We've got plenty of natural gas, and it's less expensive than fossil fuel. But fracking is still a major concern. You've seen, most of you, I'm sure you've seen the videos of people cracking open their faucet in their kitchen. They put a match to it, and out comes the gas. And supposedly the technology is designed to not allow that to happen, but we already know there's all kinds of micro tremors happening all over the place. So that's all going to be subject to big problems.
So we have an encouraging comment from Barbara Werner, Wernig, who says, "Woo-hoo!" And then we have another encouraging comment from Mindy Dunham, who also says "woohoo."
All right. Well, thank you both.
So you're to find those encouraging, I think.
That's good.
And Johnny said,
take screenshots.
Okay, and Johnny says, and once you funnel more money into the states in the form of guaranteed jobs, it doesn't seem, Johnny, that one was quite a complete sentence. I think we'd like to see the other half of that sentence.
He got a phone call. That's what
okay, Charles Lovett says, complete nonsense. These politicians are owned. And yes, Bernie showed people you don't have to have super PAC corporate financed. I suppose the end of that remark is corporate financed elections.
Right.
And yes, I think we're very much against that.
So Charles, one thing I want to comment on that. You're absolutely right, and we are running a grassroots campaign. There's a huge difference between running a national campaign and getting $27 average donations and getting a district-wide campaign and getting $27 average donations. And to be totally honest, and you can ask any of the candidates running, that average really doesn't work at the district level. It's just not enough. And do I appreciate the contributions when they come? Absolutely. But it just makes it very tough when we're up against incumbents that are taking those corporate dollars and have a war chest in excess of $1 million or more starting out their campaign. And at no point am I expecting that, or frankly, do I even think we need that, because we're running a pretty strong ground game. We're knocking on doors, we're making the phone calls, we're talking to people in their living rooms. But at the end of the day, mainstream media isn't putting me on TV yet, and they're not talking about beyond when I announced my candidacy here in the 9th District. I'm not in the local Boston news either, but I'm running, and we're here to win, and we're confident. We're going to be on the ballot. So whether my opponent wants to deal with it or not, we're going to be a contender here. So donations at the grassroots level is very, very important. And yes, we appreciate any dollar amount at all, but don't use Bernie as the barometer for the amount, okay?
Okay. Okay, so I suppose I have to ask the question, are you taking corporate contributions?
Absolutely not. And in the event that we got any in, we would absolutely send it back.
Ah, okay. So I didn't think that was completely clear, but I had the impression that you were running that kind of campaign. So I thought it was important to clarify that.
Yep.
Okay. Dave Pilkington says, just like a federal job guarantee, education can be funded federally and administered on the local level. And I had said that also. So, and Carmen Munez asks, what state and for which office is this guy running for, please? Well, Bill Cimbrelo is running for Congress in Massachusetts in the 9th Congressional District, which is the very large district that encompasses the Cape Cod area. So
I'm the only candidate that has to take a boat to part of the district.
Yes.
Okay,
so it is
Nantucket.
It is a lovely district.
It is.
Of course.
And of course, it encompasses Fall River, New Bedford, Plymouth. So it's on the other side of the bridge as well. It's a pretty large chunk of land.
All right. And some of those towns are very old, aren't they? And the industry has left.
That's very true. Well, obviously, you know, the Pilgrims settled in Plymouth. So yeah, they're certainly very old, and going back to colonial times. And we've had in New Bedford has gone through some trying times over the decades, where they had thriving mill industry, and then thriving fishing industry, and there's still a large fishing community there, but it's also not exactly what it was. So they've gone through a lot of reinventing themselves, and I think we're, you know, the country has as a whole, and I think we're reinventing ourselves again now, and that's what we need to do now, is reinvent ourselves to this Green New Deal that we talked about earlier. That's what we as a nation have to do.
Right. So think about what a federal job guarantee would do for those communities in your district.
Absolutely, and we've talked about that. I've attended the Democratic Town Committee in New Bedford. I want to say it was about 4 weeks ago now, and we spoke, or I spoke considerably about the offshore wind project there that's being contemplated now, and the state is going to be deciding relatively soon who the winning contracts are going to go to that. But New Bedford is in a good position now to take advantage of that. They've got some infrastructure that's already been put in place, but I do want to make sure that they have the human resources in place as well, and that concerns me.
Yes, and it should. Okay, of course. One thing about federal job guarantee program is that it also provides for training, so that if the human resources are not there, then the human resources can be grown by the federal job guarantee program for certain jobs. And that's an important aspect of it. And the salaries, the wages for training are still the living wage. In other words, there's a living wage for training. It's not the normal situation you see in the private sector, where the training wage is far lower than the wage after you finish training and are lucky enough to find a job in the private sector. So that's very, very different. So also, Johnny, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things I recently read some statistics, and it makes sense intuitively. We kind of know it. People that already have a job have an easier job getting a new job, right? People want to hire somebody that's already in work. They want to see that they're used to working a schedule. They're used to being responsible and showing up and all that. And that's the other side of what the federal job guarantee provides, because you've got a workforce now that's like the National Guard. They're there. They're the reservists. They're ready, and they're ready to jump in to the private sector if and when the opportunity arises. And of course, the compensation has to be as good as or better for that to be motivated. And that's what it does. It really lifts everybody up. Rather than keeping some folks down. So Again, people are going to be ready, as you say. They're going to be trained. They're going to be already employed. They can walk into a job and say, "Here, this is what I've been doing, X, Y, and Z, and I'm a responsible person and I'm earning, but I just want to go now, take it to the next level."
You're right. And what they will often have done in the social value sector jobs or the job guarantee is to develop certain skills that can be used in the private sector immediately. So not only do they have the work habits that are important still maintained, but they also have the skills that allow them to be directly employable in the private sector when the private sector once again chooses to expand.
Right.
So that's the counter-cyclical aspect of the program. So
Right.
Johnny points out that when we talked about the educational issues and also the federal job guarantee, that we're talking about an overall paradigm here that at the national level, we fund the resources. At the federal level, we protect the rights, and we let the local communities grow at will. And then he colorfully says, pass out them Chuck E. Cheese tokens and let the group play. And while I appreciate the Chuck E. Cheese tokens, okay, and the paradigm idea, what I'd like to add to that is also the idea that sometimes federal funding and local control doesn't always work out well. Historically, we have had really egregious examples of that going on in areas such as discrimination at the state and the local level. For years, the Farmers Home Administration had loan programs that it was giving out to states and to local levels, and they were county administrators and they were local level. I'm sorry, they were state administrators and they were county level.
That ended, what, 1950 or something?
No, the Farmers Home Administration ended finally, I guess, in the early 1990s. And and then some of the activities of the FMHA were continued by, there was a successor agency that continued the loan programs until 2006. So the discontinuance of those programs was relatively recent, actually. And at the time, at the height of the programs, $80 billion during the 1980s per year was spent on the loan programs. Quite a bit. Okay, and one of the faults of these programs was that the local communities were giving out a lot of dollars to individual farmers, okay, and to towns in the rural areas for community development loans, okay, things like that. But the money that was going to individual farmers was disproportionately not going to black farmers. In other words, a continuation of the historical discrimination that goes on right. in the South. Okay, so I'm afraid that the federal funding and the local control paradigm goes only so far. There's got to be some regulation at the federal level. And I think we can never forget about that.
Yeah, I would agree. And I kind of want to just take a little exception. And it's not when you say about the discrimination that happens in the South, the discrimination happens everywhere. It's a matter of degrees.
Yes, that's true. But in the case of the Farmers Home Administration, I was specifically referring to cases which arose in the South and to scandals, okay, that arose in the South. But I do generally agree that discrimination is still endemic to our society, built into the institutions, it's built into the culture, and it occurs everywhere.
Right.
Okay.
Next.
So Johnny says, I was finishing Bill's earlier sentence. You were late, Joe. Okay, Johnny, thanks. Okay, so as Karen Lee asks, sorry, I hit send too early. If elected, will you support and find a way to fund and forgive the student loan debt in Massachusetts?
Yes. We have a $1.5 trillion loan debt, which is a ball and chain, not around just students. It's around the parents of students. It's around the grandparents of students. It has an adverse trickle-down effect where our economy has been stifled. Imagine if we could, now I believe about 40 million, of 40 billion, I should say, of that is post-grad. But if we took the just taking out the graduate loans portion of it, imagine releasing that potential, because obviously you're not going to take all that money and throw it at the economy, but you release that potential into the economy. Kids have been delaying starting their families. They haven't purchased automobiles. They haven't bought new houses. So this has had a horrible impact on our economy nationwide. So as your congressman, I would not only want to see that happen in Massachusetts, I would want to see it happen nationally. And to clarify, some of you, and I lived it, and my kids have lived it, the tuition sometimes is a smaller number than the fees that these colleges charge. And so when I'm talking about when we get the loans, when you pay for these loans usually include the fees and the tuition, and oftentimes the books, or they're all included in there. So and we've got professors that are making a business out of selling books at $400 a pop, that they crack open 3 times during the semester. And I get why they do it. A lot of these professors are underpaid, so they're trying to make a buck anywhere they can. But we have to stop running our educational system as a business and bring it back to the roots of it, which is just to educate our kids. We also need to bring back, not just at the college level, we need to bring back the vocational training, and the arts and the music and all of that is now extra funds that needs to happen at the high school level. We're not really graduating well-rounded kids anymore, and that's a little bit of a side note on that. But again, getting back to the question, yeah, I would absolutely want to forgive that debt, and at an absolute bare minimum, I would want to see it restructured, but I'd rather see it forgiven, because the money's just going to circle back. People are saying, how can you do that? The money is just going to circle back into the economy, and we're looking to have a 3% GDP. Wow, that's a great way to launch that in that right direction.
I'm sorry, 3% GDP. What were you thinking about?
Well, the goal is to have a 3% growth in GDP, and if we release all that funds, again, it's not going to be one lump sum. We're going to grow the economy.
Yes, we are going to grow it, but who says the goal is for 3%? Okay, of GDP.
Well, I'm saying that's the minimum. That's the minimum target goal that's being floated out there. It's not my goal. But
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I did want to point up one final comment, and then we have to end. okay, because it's
Oh,
9
okay.
o'clock.
Time
I'm on
flies.
deadline
Okay.
once again, and I'm very sorry also that we're limited to 9 o'clock because this has been really moving along very well. So thank you
Yes,
all.
yes.
But anyway, Imran Cooper says Bill's opponent takes Enbridge Money, which is a Canadian natural gas distribution company.
Mhm.
Now, I think that's tremendously interesting because why should a Canadian natural gas distribution company be contributing to elections in the United States?
Yeah.
What could possibly motivate them to do that, I wonder?
Right.
So, on that note, I think we're going to say good night. I previously listed at the beginning of the comments, you will find Bill's website there. And on his website, he has a donation button, I believe. So
I
you'll be
do.
able to donate to him there. Okay. And don't forget, Real Progressives has a Patreon account. And I also have a Patreon account. And we would appreciate whatever contributions you are motivated to make. So thank you all again. But this has been a wonderful time, and I hope we can have Bill back at some time in the future. I think we're going to give him a rest for a few weeks, though, at least.
That's all
Okay.
right.
So,
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining and the opportunity. Thank you.
okay. Thank you all. Bye.
Good night.